Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. For it is by our ancestors won God's approval. By faith we understand the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was approved as a righteous man because God approved his gifts. And even though he is dead, he still speaks through his faith. By faith Enoch was taken away. And so he did not experience death. He was not to be found because God took him away. For before he was taken away, he was approved as one who pleased God. Now without faith, it is impossible to please God, since the one who draws near to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith Noah, after he was warned about what was not yet seen and motivated by godly fear, built an ark to deliver his family. By faith he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and set out for a place that he was going to receive an inheritance. He went out, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents as did Isaac and Jacob, co-heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, and she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Therefore, from one man, in fact, from one as good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, and as innumerable as the grains of sand along the seashore. These all died in faith, although they had not received the things that were promised. But they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. Now those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they were thinking about where they came from, they would have had an opportunity to return. But they now desire a better place. They desire a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received promises, and yet he was offering his one and only son, the one to whom it had been said, "Your seed will be called through Isaac." He considered God to be able to even raise someone from the dead. Therefore he received him back, figuratively speaking. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshipped, leaning on top of his staff. By faith Joseph, as he was nearing the end of his life, mentioned the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions concerning his bones. By faith Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months, because they saw that the child was beautiful and they did not fear the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter and chose to suffer with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. For he considered reproach for the sake of Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, since he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt behind, not being afraid of the king's anger. For Moses persevered as one who sees him who is invisible. By faith he instituted the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch the Israelites. By faith they crossed the Red Sea as though they were on dry land. When the Egyptians attempted to do this, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after being marched around by the Israelites for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute welcomed the spies in peace and did not perish with those who disobeyed. And what more can I say? There is too short for me to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword. They gained strength in weakness, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead, raised to life again. Other people were tortured, not accepting release, so that they might gain a better resurrection. Others experienced mockings and scourgings as well as bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they died by the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins, in goatskins, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and on mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All these were approved through their faith. But they did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, so that they would not be made perfect without us. Therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the author, the perfecter, the source, the beginning, the end of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured this cross, despising its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God by faith. 4 things to write down as we walk through this passage. Thing number 1, we will see defining faith. Defining faith. Secondly, we see depending on faith. Depending on faith. Third, we see declaring faith. Fourth and finally, we see the direction given to us by faith. One more time for those in the back, we see defining faith, depending on faith, declaring faith, and the direction of faith. When we read through the Bible, there's a type of preaching called expository preaching. And what you do when you exposit text is you go through, and when there are words in the Bible that you come across that you don't know, the pastor gives you definition to them. How many of you have ever heard a sermon or had someone open the Bible, or you've even read your own Bible and you came across words and you came across phrases that you did not understand? We can be honest here. Raise your hand. I read some today. I'm in the same boat as you. The idea of defining, taking things apart. Faith is a word that we know a lot about. We talk about faith and we use it incorrectly. And here is why we use it incorrectly. Whenever life gets difficult for us and we begin to consider the difficulty that may lay in front of us, we say things to people to encourage them, albeit earnestly. We will say things like, trust the Lord, you need to have enough faith. If you will just have enough faith. We use faith as if that is what gets us over the hump of what is to come. However, faith is not something that we are necessarily supposed to have enough of. Faith is something that is a gift that God has given to us, and we see that faith is about us moving in a direction that we are unsure of, not because of how faithful we may be, but because of how faithful our God happens to be. The word, as we look through the book of Hebrews and we come across this idea of faith, it's used 24 times in what I just read to you. On top of that, it's used 3 to 4 other times with modifiers, faithful, things like that. So when we talk about the idea of words in the Bible that need to be defined, we have to be careful, because I want you to know what most of us use when we talk about faith is not what the Bible is talking about. The Bible defines the word differently. And here's how the Bible defines the word. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. It is the conviction of things not seen. This is God saying to those of us in this world who have placed our trust in the person of Jesus, whether it was when you were in the 5th grade, or maybe you were a full-grown adult, maybe it just happened in this room, you placed your faith in Jesus. What you were saying is that when you look at this world, you realize this is not everything there is in having a relationship with God. If this is it, then this is a lame religion.
If all that we get from a relationship with God is everything that is broken in this world, I'm not sure that's something that I want. Faith is us seeing that though we are here, God has offered us more. And the idea of us being people who live in light of faith is completely tied to, as I said earlier, how faithful He is to us. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. What do you hope for? We hope for things that are better than what we have. Now, we inexplicably misunderstand and confuse hope and wish. I hope I get a new car. I wish I'd get a new car. I hope my youth pastor orders pizza for tonight. I wish my youth pastor would order pizza for tonight. I hope he gets oatmeal cream pies. I wish he would get oatmeal cream pies. We use the words like this. All of those are things that sound fantastic, but they are not hope. Because those things are a maybe, maybe not situation. When the Bible defines hope, it says it's the assurance of things hoped for. You, as a follower of Jesus, will get what Jesus has promised to you. And that is that He would be with you. We see the idea of faith being defined in this passage. For by it, people of old received their commendation. God encouraged Old Testament people in that they were trusting in something that God was doing. So we walk through the Old Testament. When we mentioned so many names just now. And these people are trusting that God will provide a Messiah, a Savior, a deliverer, though they never experienced that deliverer in full. They have small glimpses of Him at times. They have what we call Christophanies in the Bible sometimes. But as you walk through the passage, you notice that they are trusting in what God will do, though they've never come to know the person of Jesus in full. So you look and you see faith is being defined for us. We then get a picture in this passage of what it means for you and me, because of what faith is, to depend on God through faith. By faith, we understand the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that were visible. Look, friends, here's the deal. Every one of us in this room, and every person in the world, we're all trying to answer the exact same set of questions. We're just attempting to answer them in different ways. All of us want to know the answers to the exact same set of questions. Let me give you those. One of the questions that every person on earth will ask, and regardless of their faith, whether they are a staunch atheist, an incredibly dedicated Christian, everyone wants to know, how did I get here? And where did life originate? Have you ever wondered that? Just so I know you're with me. How many of you have ever wondered, how did I get here? Where did life come from? Okay. How many of you have ever asked yourself, I wonder what my purpose is in life? Anybody? Why am I here? How many of you ever looked around and said, what is wrong with humanity? What is wrong with people? I ask that every day. How many of us have ever asked, I wonder what good morals really are? Anybody? What happens when we die? Anyone ever asked that question? Every person on the entirety of the planet, in some way, shape, and form, asks these questions. And what God has told us from this passage is that what we've been given as people of faith is an answer that is going to be misunderstood, because we're claiming we believe in something that other people can't see, that they can't put their hands on. Tim Keller, he's one of my favorite Presbyterians, he says this: to move from religion to secularism is not so much a loss of faith as a shift into a new set of beliefs and to a new community of faith, one that draws the line between what we believe and between what is wrong in a different place. we are all answering the same questions, and we're finding our answers in different places. So when we as people of God say that we want to have a faith that's defined, that we have a hope that is more than this world, when we show that we're depending on faith, what we're saying to those around us is, I don't know where you get your answer as to where your purpose comes from or what your life should look like, but my purpose comes from something that's greater than this. And then as you look to the text, you get to see numerous pictures in the rest of chapter 11 of people, names that you're familiar with from Vacation Bible School, names that you're familiar with from Sunday school, names that you're familiar with from the Jesus Storybook Bible. All of these names of people of faith who have trusted in what God would do, but they did not even get to see him do that in full. As we look in chapter 11, we see this breakdown of what takes place in the book of Genesis. In verses 3 through 7, we get a picture of the nation of Israel. And we get the very start of that, how God created. Chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis is a story of a family. That moves to the story of a nation in chapters 12 through 50. We get to the Exodus in chapters 23 through 31 of Hebrews 11. And we get what we call the Hall of Faith. If you've ever heard these names listed out like I listed out at some point in your scriptural life, could you raise your hand? I've heard this before. I've heard preachers preach about this. I've heard it called the Great Cloud of Witnesses. We call that the Hall of Faith. That's a pretty lame title. And the reason that it's lame is it is a title that we use, and it plays off the phrase the Hall of Fame. Now, the Hall of Fame is a really big conversation in sports. I don't know if you're any sports fans in the room. Well, all right, we like sports. As you look at Hall of Fames, you begin to have a conversation as to who is the greatest or who is whatever. And we know that you get into a Hall of Fame based on your achievement, what you've done, right? So we know that this quarterback is one of the best quarterbacks to ever play. He belongs in the Hall of Fame based on his achievements. This point guard is the best point guard based on his achievements that's ever played, so we'll put him in the Hall of Fame. This tennis player is the greatest tennis player we've ever seen, so we'll make sure we put Serena Williams in the Hall of Fame. But these are words that we use to talk about someone based on their achievements. However, the Hall of Faith is not based on the achievement of other people, of those people. It's based on the achievement of a God who exists outside of it. So all of these people are, as we see in 2 and 3, depending on what God will do and trusting in God's movement, but God's always establishing, God's always working, God's always showing himself as a God who cares. And as you look at these stories in chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews, we see stories as to how faithful our God is in the face of our faithlessness. God is faithful. And in the midst of his faithfulness, the story's pretty diverse. Because I think we get in this place sometimes where we think for whatever reason God can't use me because of me. God can't use me because of how bad I've been or how dumb I was or the stupid things that I said. God can't use me because I have made myself a problem for him. God can't use me because, as I said this morning, I made dumb decisions in my dating life. God can't use me because I've just made mistakes. Yet you've got an entire list of people in Hebrews chapter 11 who are full of mistakes. Your mistakes don't get to define you if Jesus does. So for every one of us who wants to say that we can't be used, this story is pretty diverse. It's a diverse picture of God using people, calling people from throughout history, and these people look different. We get to see all these contrasts in the text. We see this contrast of Abraham and his wife Sarah. Abraham, the father of many nations. He's the patriarch in the Bible. That in a world where men ran everything, Abraham is the father of many nations, yet there was a point where there was no nation that he was part of. God started something with him. His wife Sarah, she's going to have a baby, God tells her. The problem is she's old and her husband is older. He's over 100. She's 90 years old. This is a TLC special waiting to happen. They should not be having babies. But God uses both of them based on the relationship that he had with them, how faithful he was. God comes through on what God says he will come through on. You get more in the story. You see the contrast of a name like Abel. We are familiar with Abel. He's the first person to die in the Bible. We see Enoch in the Bible. Enoch never dies. He goes into heaven. He walks in. This contrast, and the reasons these contrasts are taking place are for a very important reason. Abraham and Sarah shows the miraculous because there's going to be a greater miracle that we see in the person of Jesus in both his conception and in his resurrection. We see the miracle of what takes place with Enoch because we see that we, as people who are in relationship with Jesus, we do not have to be defined by the second death. We hear the story of Abel and how Abel shows us what death is, what sin costs us. All of these telling us good things about God and how our God is faithful to the end, a faithful friend. We see the story of Moses, who you've heard of. Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. He gets numerous verses in this passage. You would think that the next person that shows up is Joshua. If you don't know who Joshua is, one of your favorite verses to use out of context comes from Joshua chapter 1. As you look into Joshua chapter 1, you see the story of God who is faithful. But we don't get Joshua on this list. We get someone who's not like Joshua at all. Because Moses was a faithful son of Israel. The next name listed in this story is the name Rahab. Rahab is not Jewish, nor is Rahab pure. Rahab, according to the Bible, is a prostitute. So what does that tell us about our God? That God can use whoever he wants, however he wants, whenever he wants, whyever he wants, because he's God and you're not. So for every one of us who are saying really dumb things that have nothing to do with God, like God can't use me because of the things that I've done, God never used you because of you to begin with. And God is inviting you to a greater story, a bigger story, a grander story. God is calling you. All of these declarations of faith. How do you declare faith? How do you declare faith in God? We do it in really two ways, one leading into the other. We declare faith through selfless and sacrificial love. There's a story in John where Jesus shows what selflessness is. Nearing the last days of his life, he's got the disciples gathered together, and he begins to wash their feet. Now, I don't know how washing feet works in your understanding. It's a little different than it was in the Bible. We use it symbolically. I remember doing a Disciple Now. Anybody do Disciple Now in Northwest Arkansas? Awesome. Woo, I like it. So I'm doing a Disciple Now weekend, and it's a Disciple Now weekend. I show up at the church. They introduce me to someone who's going to be my co-leader for the weekend. And I'd never met him before. We did not have enough boys to get a group by myself. I've got this partner who I've never met before. So we're going to teach these boys together, but he's decided that he wants to teach them a certain thing. And I had nothing to do with that, according to him. He said, listen, man, and he actually called you one of two things all weekend, either dude or man. So I call him Dude, Man, Dude, and I may refer him to that as that from this point forward. Dude, Man, Dude and I were talking, and Dude, Man, Dude lets me know that the boys have wronged the girls and that we need to correct that, and the way that we will correct that is by washing the girls' feet. I ain't doing nothing like that. But we're talking, and then he begins to milk the boys in conversation as to what they should do. So here's what we're doing in group. These boys do not know they've wronged people because they're boys, and that's how our minds work. And he begins to ask probing questions. Is there anyone in your life that you have wronged? And all of them are like, no, we don't know. And when he gets them to the point where they're feeling guilty about something that they don't even know why they're feeling guilty, he says, have you wronged anyone in this room? Have you wronged any of the girls? At that point, and of course they hid, because that's what boys do. And in the midst of this conversation, he convinces them that they need to apologize to the girls. And we're going to do that not by just calling them, because we didn't have text messaging at the time. We're not going to apologize to them by showing up with flowers, by writing notes to say we're sorry. The way that we are going to apologize to them is by showing up at their house to wash their feet. I'll be honest, I've seen episodes of The Bachelor that are less romantic than what happened at that Disciple Now that night. These boys come in and they are tubs of water. This is absolutely inappropriate. I'm just stepping back. I'm not touching any of this. The next morning we go to church. When we get to church, the pastor begins to preach on the passage from John chapter 14, and he's beginning to explain foot washing, and he says this: we don't have to wash feet today. That's a practical need in the Bible. Why is it practical? It's practical because you have these people who have little more than leather flats on the bottom of their feet, who are walking on dirt roads, if they were lucky, with rocks and gravel, and you're walking through animal stuff, and you washed feet in the Bible to meet a practical need. And that is a selfless act of Jesus. It's not something we do symbolically, though we do it. But when we look into the scriptures, Jesus is saying, to declare faith, you show selfless love. There's a bigger picture of it in the Bible. When you get to the selfless love, eventually leads us to see Jesus not only being selfless, but being sacrificially selfless. Because we see Jesus spread his arms on a cross to die in our place. We walk through the Bible and we see all of these acts of faith pointing to a greater act of faith. That Jesus would be faithful to us to the end, arms extended, dying in our place so that we may have a relationship with God that extends into forever. Jesus as our selfless, sacrificial example of what it means to declare faith. So if I'm going to ask hard questions tonight in Northwest Arkansas, I would start with, in your own life, as someone who claims to follow Jesus, because the numbers are going to tell me this. Most of you would say you have a relationship with Jesus. And if you're telling me you have a relationship with Jesus, where are you selfless and where are you sacrificial? Now, you may be in the room and think you have a relationship with Jesus, and if I were to ask you, when did that relationship with Jesus start? If you tell me something to the effect of you've always been a Christian, you're probably not a Christian. Because there's a transition that takes place in our heart where we acknowledge our own sin and what God has done for it. But for those of us who are believers in the room, are you declaring selfless, sacrificial faith in the way that you live and in the way that you treat one another? Or is everything in your life about you? Because you see, the beauty of this passage is God revealing to us that all that we see from every one of these names finds its completion in us. I mean, notice that people dying by sword, people endangered at every point. They were approved for their faith, but they did not receive what was promised. Since God, verse 40, has provided something better for us. What has God provided for us? That we live at the point in history where we are not waiting on a Messiah to come. We are living in response to the Messiah who has come. We are living and seeking by God's grace to show that Messiah has done everything that God promised he would do. So therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and that list is not exhaustive, there are so many other names, people of faith in our lives, people of faith that we know, people that we have spent time with. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Friends, let me just ask you a very simple question right now. For those of you who are believers in Jesus, are you trusting that God is faithful enough for you to leave the sin that you are clinging to? For you to run from the sin that has you ensnared? Because the passage is saying to us, we can walk away from these things because of the freedom that Christ has offered. Are we going to leave behind what is holding on to us? So you're going to leave a weekend. So here's the deal, man. We show up at this thing. It's awesome. We can do Christianity so easy at a place like this. We come into this room. Everything's focused around the Bible. We do everything very Bible-centric. We're going to do things around the name of Jesus. We're going to sing about Jesus. I'm going to preach about Jesus. Ezekiel's going to rap about Jesus. We are pro-Jesus. You're going to go recreate on the field and you're going to talk about Jesus. You're going to do trust falls. You're like, oh, I trust Jesus. That stuff happens all around a camp like this. We pray before meals here. That whole cafeteria is dedicated to Jesus. The antlers on the wall have Jesus written. I know they don't really. But we have the whole notion of Jesus at every inch of this ground. The people who run Camp Siloam, they prayed for you before you got here, and they prayed to Jesus. Jesus is saturating this place. But you're going to go home, and the boyfriend or girlfriend that you're sleeping with, they still want to sleep with you. The anger you feel towards your mom and dad over their divorce, it hasn't gone away. The rage in your heart, the lust in your heart, the struggles in your life, they are still there. Will we realize that God is faithful enough to move us beyond those things? Will we trust that God has design and intent for our life to declare faith in the face of our sinful struggles? Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us. I'm not a runner, I'm against it. But when you talk about endurance, you're talking about a different kind of running than sprinting. It means that you know this is going to last a long time. God has given you years. And your idea of walking with Jesus is not a weekend sprint at Camp Siloam. It's an enduring, faithful, dedicated commitment. Because your God has endured the cross, He is faithful to you, and He is committed to you. Let us run with endurance the race before us. How, chat? How do I do those things? Keeping our eyes on Jesus. Why? Because faith starts with Him, it ends with Him. Look, you don't muster up faith. Faith is a gift given to you by God. By grace, you're saved through faith, not of yourselves. It's a gift of God. For the joy that He is the source, the perfecter, the beginning, the end, the initiator, the closer of our faith. It starts with Jesus, it ends with Jesus. If your faith is void of something that starts and ends with Jesus, it's not biblical faith. For the joy that lay before Him, He endured the cross, scorning or despising its shame, and He sat down at the right hand of God. Right hand of God is a big biblical imagery, and the reason it's big is because it means that everything that needs to be done for you to be saved and for you to be shaped and for you to be sent by God has been done. Jesus has done enough to save you. Jesus has done enough to shape you, and Jesus has done enough to send you. All of those things are found in the completion of Jesus on the cross. Because here we see in this text something that we overlook if we're not careful. For the joy that lay before Him, He endured the cross. The cross does not seem to be something that I would find much joy in. We don't need to misread this and think that Jesus is just leaning into pain. The joy that lays before Jesus is not the cross. The joy that lays before Jesus is you. It's me. It's that Jesus values you. I don't know why, but we live in a climate where we we regularly tell people that they don't matter. But Jesus, who is even inviting some of you right now, Jesus, who just saved some of you right then, he says to you, you matter. You're valuable, and I love you enough to die for you. Enduring the cross, scorning its shame. Sin does not get to define you. Jesus does. Will we place our trust in him? Here's what I want you to do tonight. I want you to bow your heads. I don't want you to look around or anything like that. I want to talk to those of you who aren't Christians in the room, and I think you may know who you are. You've never entered into a relationship with Christ, and he offers you that tonight. He offers you a chance to walk with him, to know him, to love him, to be loved by him. And even now, you sense that Jesus is inviting you into a relationship with himself. So I want to walk you through a conversation with the Lord. Prayers don't save people. As I told your adults last night, Jesus saves people. But I want to give you some handles because I want you to have a conversation about this with an adult in just a moment. Jesus, pray something like this. Jesus, I need you to save me from my sin. You have done everything that needs to happen. You have died in my place, and you have gotten out of the grave so that I could have life forever. So Jesus, I'm going to give you the sin that would kill me and send me to hell. And I'm going to give you my life. Jesus, I need you. One more time, for those of you who are not believers, I don't want to confuse the two, but if you're not a believer in Jesus, Jesus, I need you to free me from my sin. You have died in my place, and you have offered life in exchange. So I'm going to leave that sin with you, and I'm going to trust you. I want a relationship with you. Now, I want you to, if you just pray that or something to that effect, did not be those exact words, but if you prayed something like that, I want you to be very bold right now, and I want you to put your hand up right where you are. Just hand up so I can see it. Hand up so I can see it. Keep them up. Keep them up. Anybody else? Anybody else? Now, if your hand is up, I want you to stand up right where you are. Hand up, stand up right where you are. I'm going to count to 3, and you're going to stand. Just a bold, bold step. 1, 2, 3, go. Stand. Awesome. Now I want you to walk to the back of the room, and there's going to be an adult who meets you there. Go walk toward the back, and one of our leaders is going to meet you there. Go, go, go. Thank you so much. At any point, if you're a believer, if you have placed your faith in Jesus tonight, I would encourage you to walk toward the back and let us pray with you, connect you to an adult who loves you. But again, most of you would tell me that you're a believer in Jesus, yet I'm going to say that there is a chance that though you have a faith in Christ, you're going home to a struggle with sin. You may have even broken brought it here, and you want to walk away from that, you have to be proactive or you will be inactive. So just for us to admit tonight that struggle is in our midst, and that so we can know we're not alone. If you would say, I know when I get home that all the difficulties ahead of me, and I want to trust Jesus with it. Could you raise your hand? Could you raise your hand? I know my struggles are coming. I know they're coming. We're going to spend some time tonight in response to this. We're going to sing. But I don't want you to stand and sing just because that's what we do at this point in worship services. Just sing from your seat. I want you to wrestle in your heart with what it means for you to live for Jesus. If you feel the need to come up here and pray, I'm going to ask we don't come up and all come to the front of the room tonight during our response. I would ask this, that we leave this space open if someone wants to come kneel at the front of the room and just ask God for Him to remind them of how good He is each day. Lord, we thank you for tonight. We thank you that your word is powerful and that by faith we've been given direction. So Lord, let us run with endurance the race that is marked before us, fixing our eyes on you because you endured the cross, scorning its shame, and you sat down at the right hand of God. Jesus, you have done all that needs to be done for salvation, all that needs to be done for sanctification, all that needs to be done for us to have a relationship with you, God. So move in our midst. Continue to do so. We ask this in your powerful name. Move as the Lord leads you to move.